On a freezing winter night, a routine walk home turned into a nightmare for Maya Johnson when two police officers forced her to do push-ups on the icy sidewalk. But what happened next would shock the nation and change everything. It was a bitterly cold winter night in the small town of Willow Creek, USA. The streets were deserted, and the only sound was the howling wind. A young black woman, 28-year-old Maya Johnson, was walking home from her late shift at the local diner. She was bundled up in a thick coat, scarf, and gloves, but the freezing temperature still bit at her skin. As she turned the corner onto her street, she noticed the flashing blue and red lights of a police cruiser behind her. The police car pulled up beside her, and two officers stepped out. They were both white men in their late 30s with stern expressions on their faces. One of them, Officer Bradshaw, approached Maya and asked for her ID. Maya, confused but compliant, handed over her identification. The officers ran her information through their system, but everything came back clean. There was no reason for them to detain her, but instead of letting her go, Officer Bradshaw and his partner, Officer Daniels, decided to make an example out of Maya. They accused her of loitering and suspicious behavior and ordered her to do push-ups on the icy sidewalk as a form of punishment. Maya, terrified and freezing, had no choice but to comply. She dropped to the ground and began doing push-ups, her breath visible in the cold air as tears streamed down her face. The officers watched her with smug satisfaction, making snide comments about her form and laughing at her struggle. After what felt like an eternity, they finally let her go, warning her to stay out of trouble. Maya stumbled home, her body numb from the cold and her spirit crushed by the humiliation. The next morning, Maya woke up with a fever and a deep ache in her muscles. She knew she couldn't let what happened slide. She called her best friend Lisa, who was a local journalist, and told her everything. Lisa was outraged and immediately started investigating. She reached out to the Willow Creek Police Department for a statement, but they refused to comment. Meanwhile, Maya decided to take matters into her own hands. She went to the police station and demanded to speak to the chief. When she was finally granted a meeting, she recounted the entire incident, her voice shaking with anger and fear. The chief, a middle-aged man named Richard Hargrove, listened intently but seemed more concerned with protecting his officers than addressing Maya's grievances. But Maya wasn't about to give up. She knew that if she didn't fight back, this kind of abuse would continue to happen to others. She contacted a civil rights attorney who agreed to take on her case pro bono. Together, they filed a formal complaint against Officers Bradshaw and Daniels, alleging racial profiling, harassment, and cruel and unusual punishment. As news of the incident spread, the community of Willow Creek was divided. Some people supported Maya, recognizing the blatant racism and abuse of power. Others, however, defended the officers, claiming that Maya must have done something to provoke them. The local news outlets picked up the story, and soon it was making headlines across the country. Protests erupted in Willow Creek, with people demanding justice for Maya and accountability for the police department. Social media was flooded with hashtags like #JusticeForMaya and #EndPoliceBrutality. Celebrities and activists weighed in, calling for the officers to be fired and charged. The pressure on the Willow Creek Police Department was mounting. Chief Hargrove held a press conference where he announced that Officers Bradshaw and Daniels had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. He promised a thorough and transparent process. But many people were skeptical. The internal investigation into the incident involving Maya Johnson and the two officers, Bradshaw and Daniels, was anything but straightforward. From the beginning, the Willow Creek Police Department seemed more focused on protecting its own than uncovering the truth. Chief Richard Hargrove, under pressure from both the public and Maya's legal team, announced that an internal affairs unit would conduct a thorough review of the case. However, the process was slow, opaque, and riddled with delays, leaving the community increasingly frustrated and suspicious. Maya's attorney, a sharp and determined civil rights lawyer named Marcus Green, immediately filed a formal request for the body camera footage from the night of the incident. The police department initially refused, citing ongoing investigations and privacy concerns. This only fueled public outrage, as many saw it as an attempt to cover up the officer's misconduct. Protests outside the police station grew louder, with chants of "Release the footage" and "Transparency now" echoing through the streets. Marcus Green didn't back down. He took the fight to court, filing a motion to compel the department to release the body camera footage. The judge, after reviewing the case, ruled in Maya's favor, ordering the police to hand over the video within 48 hours. The department reluctantly complied, but not without attempting to redact portions of the footage, claiming it contained sensitive information. Green challenged this as well, and the judge ordered the full, unedited video to be released to the public. When the footage finally surfaced, it was explosive. The video clearly showed Maya, visibly frightened and shivering in the cold, being harassed by officers Bradshaw and Daniels. There was no evidence of her resisting or behaving suspiciously, just a young woman trying to get home after a long day at work. The officers' smug expressions and mocking comments were captured in chilling detail, as was the moment they forced her to do push-ups on the icy ground. The footage left no doubt. This was a blatant abuse of power and a clear case of racial profiling. The release of the video sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. National news outlets picked up the story, and it quickly went viral on social media. Hashtags like #JusticeForMaya and #EndPoliceBrutality trended for days, with celebrities, activists, and politicians weighing in. The public demanded accountability, and the pressure on the Willow Creek Police Department became unbearable. Chief Hargrove, realizing the severity of the situation, held another press conference. This time, he announced that officers Bradshaw and Daniels had been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. He also promised a comprehensive review of department policies and training procedures. However, many in the community remained skeptical, viewing these actions as too little, too late. Meanwhile, Marcus Green and Maya's legal team continued to push for justice. They filed a civil lawsuit against the police department seeking damages for the emotional and physical trauma Maya had endured. They also called for an independent investigation into the department's handling of the case, arguing that the Internal Affairs Unit could not be trusted to conduct an impartial review. As the investigation dragged on, more details began to emerge. It was revealed that both officers had prior complaints of misconduct, though none had resulted in serious disciplinary action. This revelation further eroded public trust in the department and raised questions about why these officers had been allowed to remain on the force. The investigation ultimately concluded that officers Bradshaw and Daniels had violated multiple department policies, including those related to use of force, racial profiling, and professional conduct. The findings were forwarded to the district attorney's office, which announced that criminal charges would be filed against the officers. For Maya, the investigation was a painful but necessary step in her fight for justice. It exposed the systemic issues within the police department and brought national attention to the broader problem of police brutality and racial bias. While the road ahead was still long, the investigation marked a turning point, one that would ultimately lead to accountability and, hopefully, change. The fallout from the investigation was swift and far-reaching. With the body camera footage now public and the Internal Affairs report confirming the officer's misconduct, the Willow Creek Police Department and the broader community were forced to confront the ugly truth. The reckoning had arrived, and it was time for accountability. Chief Richard Hargrove, under immense pressure from the public, city officials, and even his own officers, held a press conference to announce the department's next steps. Standing at the podium, his face grim, he revealed that officers Bradshaw and Daniels had been terminated from the force effective immediately. He called their actions a gross violation of public trust and a stain on the department's reputation. While some saw this as a step in the right direction, others criticized the chief for not taking responsibility for the systemic issues that had allowed such behavior to persist. The district attorney's office also moved quickly. Citing the evidence from the investigation, they announced criminal charges against Bradshaw and Daniels, including assault, misconduct, and violation of Maya Johnson's civil rights. The charges sent a strong message. No one was above the law, not even those sworn to enforce it. The officers, once confident in their impunity, now faced the very real possibility of jail time. The trial that followed was highly publicized, with media outlets from across the country covering every detail. Maya, though emotionally drained, took the stand to recount her ordeal. Her testimony was powerful and raw, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. She described the fear she felt that night, the humiliation of being forced to do push-ups in the freezing cold, and the lingering trauma that had affected her ever since. Her words resonated far beyond the courtroom, sparking conversations about racial injustice and police accountability nationwide. The prosecution presented the body camera footage as the centerpiece of their case. The video, played in full for the jury, was damning. It showed Bradshaw and Daniels laughing as Maya struggled to comply with their demands, their casual cruelty laid bare for all to see. The defense attempted to argue that the officers were simply maintaining order, but their arguments fell flat in the face of such overwhelming evidence. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Bradshaw and Daniels were sentenced to probation, community service, and mandatory sensitivity training. While many, including Maya, felt the punishment was too lenient, the verdict was still a victory, a rare instance of police officers being held accountable for their actions. The case also prompted a broader reckoning within the Willow Creek Police Department. Chief Hargrove, facing calls for his resignation, announced a series of reforms aimed at preventing future abuses. These included the establishment of a civilian review board to oversee complaints against officers, mandatory body cameras for all patrol units, and comprehensive training on racial bias and de-escalation techniques. While skeptics questioned whether these changes would be enough, they represented a step toward rebuilding trust with the community. For Maya, the reckoning was bittersweet. While she was relieved that Bradshaw and Daniels had been held accountable, she knew that her fight was far from over. The incident had left her with lasting scars, both physical and emotional, and she was determined to use her experience to push for broader change. She began working with advocacy groups, speaking at rallies, and sharing her story to raise awareness about police brutality and racial injustice. The reckoning wasn't just about punishing two rogue officers. It was about confronting the systemic issues that had allowed such behavior to flourish. It was about holding institutions accountable and demanding justice for those who had been wronged. And while the road ahead was long, Maya's courage and resilience had already sparked a movement that would continue to grow one step at a time. The reckoning had come, and it was only the beginning. The aftermath of the trial and the public reckoning marked a new chapter for Maya Johnson, the Willow Creek community, and the broader fight for justice. While the case had brought accountability to officers Bradshaw and Daniels, Maya knew that true change required more than just punishing individuals. It demanded systemic reform and a sustained commitment to justice. For Maya, moving forward meant turning her pain into purpose and using her voice to create a lasting impact. In the weeks and months following the trial, Maya became a prominent advocate for police reform and racial justice. She partnered with civil rights organizations, speaking at rallies, town halls, and even testifying before state legislators. Her story resonated with countless people who had experienced similar injustices, and she quickly became a symbol of resilience and courage. Maya also focused on her own healing. The trauma of that freezing night and the subsequent legal battle had taken a toll on her mental and physical health. She began attending therapy to process her emotions and joined support groups for survivors of police brutality. Through these efforts, she found strength in community and solidarity with others who understood her pain. Determined to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she did, Maya founded a nonprofit organization called Freeze No More. The organization aimed to provide resources and support to victims of police abuse, including legal assistance, mental health counseling, and financial aid. Freeze No More also focused on education, offering workshops on knowing your rights during police encounters and how to safely document incidents of misconduct. The nonprofit quickly gained traction, attracting donations and volunteers from across the country. Maya's story had touched a nerve, and people were eager to contribute to the cause. Freeze No More became a beacon of hope for those who felt voiceless and powerless in the face of systemic injustice. In Willow Creek, the case had sparked a long overdue conversation about race, policing, and accountability. Community leaders, activists, and local officials came together to address the deep-seated issues within the police department. The Civilian Review Board, established as part of the department's reforms, began its work, offering a platform for residents to voice their concerns and hold officers accountable. Maya worked closely with the board, ensuring that the voices of marginalized communities were heard. She also collaborated with the police department to develop training programs focused on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and implicit bias. While progress was slow, these efforts marked a significant shift in the department's approach to policing. Maya's story didn't just resonate locally. It became a national rallying cry for police reform. Her case was cited in debates about body cameras, qualified immunity, and the need for independent oversight of law enforcement. Politicians and activists alike pointed to her experience as evidence of the urgent need for change. Maya was invited to speak at national conferences and even testified before Congress, urging lawmakers to pass legislation that would hold police departments accountable and protect citizens from abuse. Her advocacy helped push forward bills aimed at banning chokeholds, requiring body cameras, and creating national databases to track officer misconduct. As time passed, Maya's impact continued to grow. She was featured in documentaries, podcasts, and news segments, each time using her platform to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced. She also wrote a memoir detailing her journey from victim to advocate, which became a bestseller and inspired countless readers. Despite the challenges, Maya remained hopeful. She often spoke about the importance of resilience and the power of collective action. "What happened to me was wrong," she would say, "but it doesn't define me. What defines me is what I choose to do next, and I choose to fight for a better future." Moving forward wasn't easy. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, but Maya's determination never wavered. She knew that the fight for justice was a marathon, not a sprint, and she was prepared to keep pushing for as long as it took. Her work with Freeze No More continued to grow, expanding to new cities and states. She also mentored young activists, encouraging them to use their voices and stand up for what they believed in. Maya's story had become a catalyst for change, proving that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, one person's courage could ignite a movement. Years later, Maya returned to the spot where the incident had occurred. The icy sidewalk had long since thawed, and the street was now lined with murals and plaques commemorating her fight for justice. As she stood there, she reflected on how far she and the community had come. The road ahead was still long, but Maya knew that every step forward was a victory. Her story had sparked a reckoning, inspired reform, and given hope to countless others. And as she walked away from that spot, she did so with her head held high, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Maya Johnson had turned her pain into power, and in doing so, she had become a force for change, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a path forward. Months after the trial, Maya returned to the spot where the incident had occurred. The icy sidewalk had thawed and the sun was shining brightly. She stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. Then, with a deep breath, she turned and walked away, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As she walked, she thought about the countless others who had suffered at the hands of those sworn to protect and serve. She knew that her fight was just one small part of a much larger struggle, but she also knew that every victory, no matter how small, brought them one step closer to a more just and equitable world. And with that thought, Maya Johnson, the woman who had been forced to do push-ups in the freezing cold, became a symbol of resilience, courage, and hope for a better future.